forward to correct these problems. Otherwise, a Republican will never be elected president again. So he said, is there an example where if you erect a mechitza, it leads to an isser or a chumrah? I'll show you an example that there are. You have like a patio. It's got two walls, and on the open side of two parallel walls, and on the open side of the wall, sheyesh la ptzimin, you have like a corner posts that stick in a little bit into the entrance. Kshera, because a sukkah, you only need two and a little mashu. However, ilu hishva ptzima, but if you remove those and you draw a fictional wall, psula. So it's an example where if you erect a mechitza, it ends up being an isser. First of all, I hold peace sikra yori desoisim, that from the roof, right? You have an open-ended gazebo, right? You only have parallel walls and it's open. It's you can go through and through, but the roof on the top of the openings, you draw down a fictional wall. So for me, it's ksher. Lididcha, it's silik mechitza. It's removal of the mechitza that led to a problem, not erecting a mechitza. What, you've never seen an example where that when you erect a mechitza it leads to an isra? I'll show you that there is. Batanya. You have a house. Half of the house has a ceiling. The other half of the house does not, is open to the sky. Now, Gifon in Khan, if you have grapes planted in the part of the house that is roofed, let's say right at the border there, mutter lizra kan, you're allowed to plant even grain, right, which otherwise would be a climb, right next to it. We say that where the roof ends, you draw an imaginary wall down, and that wall will separate between the grapes and the wheat. However, Hishvis Kiro, let's say now you you create a ceiling now to cover the unroofed part, which is essentially like adding a mechitza. Now it's usher. Now you don't have this dropping down wall because it's all the same. And now you can't plant the wheat next to the grain. So here you've added a mechitza and it's led to an isser. So it's not. You remove that fictional wall. So it's removal of a wall, not adding a wall. What, you've never seen an example where by adding a mechitza it leads to a prohibition? Vatanya. Yesh b'mechitzos hakerem lahakel lahachner. You have a vineyard, and I'm going to point out that sometimes when you erect a wall, it will lead to a leniency. And sometimes when you erect a wall, it'll lead to a chumrah. Ketza. Kerem anatua ad ikar mechitza zaremi ikar mechitza ve'elech. You have a vineyard and you have a wall, and the vines are planted right next to the wall. You're allowed on the other side of the wall to plant grain. You don't have to distance 4 amas. Normally you have to distance, but the wall separates. So here's an example of erecting a wall which leads to a leniency. There was no wall there. You have to separate 4 amas and then plant. So this is an example of a mechitza by a vineyard, which leads to a leniency. How do you have a wall that leads to a stringency by a vineyard? You have a wall and you started planting the grapes 11 amas away from the wall. The din is lo yavi zera l'sham. You cannot plant any grains there for because it's a special chumrah there. The Gemara will explain why that is, because of the way you set up a vineyard. And she ilmole ein mechitza. If there was no mechitza, marchik arba amis was there. You would only have to mark off 4 amis and then plant. So zui mechitza zaker la'achmir. So this is a perfect example of why sometimes erecting a mechitza leads to an isser. So that was said to Abai. Omer le Abai responded, Utameich usfin mimasnisim. Why do you have to search and find that baraisa? I can find you a Beferish Mishnah that says basically the same thing. It's not. Korachas hakerem. The Gemara will explain what that is. Beishamai oimrim. That means if you have a vineyard and you want to plant other stuff, you have 2 vineyards, and you want to plant other kinds of grain in between, you need a separation of esrim va'arba amos, 24 amos. We'll see how that works. Ubeisil oimrim sheishesrei amo. You need like this. You need whenever you have a vineyard, you need 4 amos on the outskirt, on the periphery of the vineyard, for your plow and your tractor and the various implements you have to come to tend the grapevine. So you need 4 amos. So you have 2 vineyards, vineyard here, and you want to plant in between the vineyard. So you have to have 4 amos on either side of the vineyard. That's 8. And then you have to have 8 amos so that each in space in between the vineyards can have 4 amos. That's the way Beis Hillel lives. Mechola kerem. Now, let's say around the vineyard, and you want to plant other things. Beis Shammai onim sheishesrei amo. You need 16 amos, and then you can plant. You need 12. Now the Gemara will explain what do we mean by karachas and machol. The ezohi karachas kerem shecharav emsiuso. You have a big vineyard, and the middle of the vineyard got ruined, and you want to plant in. So now you have a vineyard on one side and vineyard on the other side, and you want to plant in between. So im ein sham sheisas trei am according to Beis Hillel, you need at least 16 amos. Lo yavi zer l'sham. Because like I said, you need 4 amos on the periphery of one, and 4 amos on the periphery on the other, and then you need 8 in between. Hayu sham sheisas trei am nois lo kidei avodoso. Is there a moister? So if you had 16, you give each vineyard 4 in order to deal with the vineyard, and the rest you can put seeds in. That's karachas hakerem. Ezohi machol hakerem bein hakerem legader. This is when you have a vineyard and then you have a fence. So im ein sham shtei mesrei am, you need at least 12 amos. That's why we said before, if you have 11, you can't plant anything between the fence and the vineyard. If you have 12, up until 12, lo yavi zer l'sham. If you have 12, noisen lo kedei avodos. So you give 4 amos to the periphery of the vineyard, and then you have 8 amos to plant the zores amos. So Abaya says, here's another example where having a wall is worth than not having a wall. Because you see, when you didn't have a wall, you had even a larger space to plant. Here, by erecting the wall, you have less of a place to plant. So Abai is wondering, why didn't you ask from the Mishnah? Why did you have to bring this baraisa? What's the reason over there? It's because it's a whole different issue. You need 4 amas on the periphery of each keren in order to bring your tractor and your plows. By a fence, since there's no, people are normally going to put seeds next to a fence. He's mafkir, that's in between the beni beni. So if you have arba, a minimum of arba, then it's choshev and he won't be mavatal. The ilo lo chashvinan. So it has nothing to do with the fact that a mechitza makes it worse. It has to do with the specifics of the rules of a care. Rav Yehuda. Shlosha karfefios zebet sadze. You have karfefs, right? Karfef is up to 5,000 square amas. And each one has a dira connected to it. And each person gets 5,000 square amas. And then the outer ones are wider. So basically there are like 4 walls, basically, except the karfef in the middle creates an indent so that there isn't 4 walls for the middle. For certainly only the outer ones have 4 walls. And there are individual people living in the karfes. Nasa kishayara, it's like a caravan. You give them as much space as they need. It's not minimized to 5,000 square amas. However, let's say the middle one is wider. So here you end up having 4 walls for the middle one, but only 3 walls for the outer one. Individual people living in each karfef. So then each one only gets 2 base saw, 5,000 square amas. We asked the following question. You asked the question of 1 and 1 and 1 in each one. What about echad bezev, echad bezeh? You have 1 in each outer karfef. Ushnai b'mtzoi, 2 people in the middle one. So if you drag 2 people to the outer one plus a havi, plus a havi. So you will have 3, and maybe we give. There's no limit to the space. O dilma, no chad lahachanafik, v'chad lahachanafik. That 2 don't go to 1, only 1 goes here, 1 goes there, and the middle one is left empty, and you won't have 3 in any specific one. Then the intim saloimer chad lahachanafik, v'chad lahachanafik. You're going to say like that. I'll ask you another kasha. Shnayim bezer, shnayim bezer, v'echad b'mtzoi ma'u. You have 2 people in the outside karfef, 2 people in the other outside karfef, and 1 in the middle. Hachavadai, here for sure, ilachanafik plus avi. If the guy from the middle goes to 1, you're going to have 3, ilachanafik plus avi, and therefore we would say that you're not limited to the 5,000 square amas. Oy dilma, aim ilachanafik, aim ilachanafik. It's a suffix. Maybe one guy left the karfef. Since it's a suffix, maybe we wouldn't say that. So the hilchas abayim lakula. These questions are answered lakula. We're lenient, and we treat it. We give them as much space as they need. So let's say you have 2 chatzeros side by side, but one chatzer is lower than the other one by only 5 amas. 5 tfachim. And then you build a wall of 5 tfachim on the upper chatzer. So now, if you measure from the bottom chatzer, you have 10. But if you measure from the upper one, you only have 5. and then you have the indent. So the question is, are they mitztarif or not? Gidud chamisha mechitza. Chamisha ain't mitztarfin. Ad sheyeh okula begidud okula b'mechitza. That means you'll have a valid separation between the chatzeros if either the bottom chatzer is 10 tefachim lower, or you build a 10 tefach high wall. But you can't be mitztarif 5 as a depression and 5 in a wall. That's what the Gemara says. Meisvei, I'll ask you a kasha. Shtei chatzer zulam al mizu. We have this case. One chatzer higher than the other. Ve'alyon gvoim and atachton asar tefachim. The upper chatzer was 10 tefachim higher. And here comes the kicker. Oh, sheyesh bo gidud chamisha mechitza chamisha. It equates a case of having a depression of 5 and a wall of 5. They're both the same. It says ma'arvin shnayim. This separation is viewed as a legitimate mechitza, and there's no pesach here, so they can each make their own eruv. They can't make a joint eruv. Vein marvin echad. Pachas mikan. Of course, if it's less than 10 tefachim, then they cannot make their own eruv. Marvin echad, vein marvin shnayim. But the Gemara has brought its proof against the statement that was made by Rav Chizda that it seems like Gidud Chamisha, Mechitza Chamisha is mitzvah. So Rav explains this sugya. Amar Rav, Moed Rav Chizda b'tachtoina. He agrees that for the tachtoina it works, because if you're a person who's living in the lower chutzner and you look, you see a depression of a wall, dirt of 5 and then a wall of 5. So you see 10. So for you, it'll be the legabe have mechitza. Aval legabe elyon lav mechitza he. She'ein roitz ne'asar, he only sees 5. Because the mechitza is not minker. So ihachi. So if you're going to learn the way we've learned, so then tachtoina to arev shnayim. So the bottom one has no choice. It could never make an eruv jointly because it has a real division. So you can only, for the bottom people, each one has to make its own eruv. Lo tarv echad. El Yona, where there is no mechitza between them. Lo ta'arev lo echad v'lo shnayim. They don't have a real separation. And then they're open to a place that it doesn't have anything that's also to it. So the answer shouldn't be like the Brisa gave. It should be that the bottom one can only make its own eruv, and the top one can't make any eruv. The upper one had a mechitza of 10, but they left a Pesach there. So there's a Pesach less than 10 amas. So that's why you can make either 1 or 2 if you close the Pesach. But the Gemara doesn't accept that. What does the Sefer say? Pachus mikan, that if the separation between the Chatzeros are less than 10 Tvachim, so then they're viewed as one joint Eruv. So Ma'arvin Echad, Be'em Arvin Shnayim. But if you were correct, Chad to Arev and Iboy Trey to Arev, you'd be able, if you close the Pesach, you could make 2 Eruv. And if the Pesach was open, you could make 1 Eruv. So your attempt to answer it, that it was a wall with a Pesach, doesn't seem to make sense. Omer Rabbi Breda Rava, the lower chotzer was opened up completely to the Elyon. Rashi says, She'ein berchava ela eser amis. It's 10 amis wide. Hilkach asra Elyon aleav lo ma'arva badoy. It becomes aser, and you can't make an eru. Kididnan g'doy l'muter, like having a big chotzer opening up to a little chotzer, where we said that the ketana was asura. Iachi. So if you're going to say like that, tachtoina chad ta'arev trei lo ta'arev. The lower one views both chatzeros as one, and therefore you can only make one eruv, not two. El Yona, which can close it off, iboy trey to arv, iboy chat to arv. And Gemara says eina chanami. That's how we paskin. That's how it works. And the chiktoni pachos mikan marvin echad vein marvin shnayim. That's only on the tachtoina, but on the El Yona you could make either one or two. Dorash Maremar. Gidud Chamisha Mechitza Chamisha Mitztarfin, which is against Rav Chizda. That if you have a depression of 5 and a wall of 5, that's Mitztarf to 10. Did you learn something about Mechitza? Amar Lo. However, Hilchasa, Gidud Chamisha Mechitza Chamisha Mitztarfin. It's an important halacha. Shulchan Aruch paskins that it is Mitztarf. Boy Rav Yishai. So let's say two chatzeros made an eruv. And the wall in between the chatzer fell down on Shabbos. And it's as if now there's new people living in the eruv who showed up on Shabbos. They weren't there from Erev Shabbos. So, do you not boim b'Shabbos ma'ushe yasru? Do they asr on each other? Each one had made their own eruv, and then the wall fell down. And now it's like each chutzner has new people dwelling in their eruv. Do they asr? I mean, we learned before, gentlemen, that the status of the eruv when it's Erev Shabbos remains. You can't have the eruv for half the Shabbos and then that goes away. It means if it was kosher at the beginning, it remains kosher the whole Shabbos, even if the wall fell. That's what we learned before. In fact, that's what Rav Chiz is going to quote. On Rav Chiz Toshma, Chotzer Gedolah Shnifritzel Ktana. You have a big chotzer where it was permitted that a wall broke and it got opened up to a ktana. Hagdola muteres v'ktana asura. Mipnei she'ike pischa shugdol becomes just like the entrance of the gedola. Amar Rabba Eimer mibad yom nifritzah. That's not a raya that because this case happened on Shabbos. It didn't happen on Shabbos. It happened before Shabbos. Amar le'abai loy temamar Eimer elavada mibad yom nifritzah. It's not maybe. It's vadai that the action took place before Shabbos. Amar Huda Amar, you were the one who said, "Boy name Rav Huna, boy name Rav Yehuda." Iriv derech haPesach v'nistam haPesach. Let's say there was a wall between two chatzeros, and there was a window. The window allows them to make a joint eruv, and then the window got closed up by a earthquake. Or iriv derech chalon v'nistam chalon. They made an eruv through the window, and then the window got closed. Mao. The Omar Li, Shabbos, Kivin Utra. Doesn't make a difference if on Shabbos it changed. Once it got permitted and the two chatzeros could use the eruv jointly, we don't care what happens on Shabbos. If it changes on Shabbos, the status doesn't change. And the Gemara is going to learn the Itmar. Koisel shebein shtei chatzer shenofal. You have a wall between chatzeros. Here they did not make an eruv originally between them. But now, because you could not, if you have a wall between two chatzeros, each one has to make their own. You can't make a joint one unless there's a window or a pesach. But now the wall drops. So Rav Amar ein metatlin bo arba amos. Now both chatzeros become aser because they didn't make an eruv together. Rav Lesley Hoyel Hutra. He doesn't say once they're permitted to carry in their chotzer on the beginning of Shabbos, it remains permitted. I'm reading Rashi. Ukechad chotzer lo mashvinan lei. The kaimel on chotzer shlo irva diver kol metatlan kem sheshav subavira. Dahi kul chad rishusi aval hacha shtei rishuyis asura zuam zuayu. This started off as two rishuyos that were asra with each other. Therefore, each chotzer is now wide open to the place that's prohibited to it. Saying Even though we learned before, you can go from a chutzner to a chutzner to a chutzner. It's all one rishus. That's hacha b'she'ir v'kolachas la'atzmas. That's each one made their own eruv. Here they did not make. Rav the Tamei, the Amar Allah Rab Shimon. However, only hu shelo irvu. Aval irvu shtei rishuyos. So this is bringing in a big complexity. We learned this yesterday. Remember the machlokas between Rav Meir, Rab Shimon, and the Chachamim about whether irvu or lo irvu. So here, Rav is consistent with what he said before, that it's if it's irvu, they made two rishuyos. Well, Omar, each one can carry up until the word they could carry before, which was the location of the wall. We'll go into this a little bit more tomorrow. So tomorrow, we're going to learn the Servum Rabbanon. We're learning halachas of coronavirus and how they viewed epidemics, right? The Chassam Sofer and the other major